Minecraft's food system has been through a fair few changes. Initially food restored health, but then the hunger bar was introduced in beta 1.8, and since 1.11 the player heals rapidly upon becoming full. In spite of all these changes, players still don't need to meaningfully interact with the food system. Golden carrots, steak, and cooked chicken are the main optimal foods. Once a player has secured a decent amount of any of those, the interaction is reduced to eating every so often, which is considered an annoyance by many. The mod I have developed for this video, which I've named Mindful Eating, aims to address these problems, but before I show you how, first I'd like to ask you what you think is happening in this clip. As you can see, my hunger bar has the standard chicken drumsticks, but when I eat this carrot they change to a green icon. Then when I start to run around, you can see a subtle sheen move across the hunger bar. So, what do you think happened here? What do you think the sheen is trying to tell you? Feel free to pause the video now and leave a comment with your answer. Your feedback will help me a lot. The reason I ask first is because these animations are meant to communicate the mod's mechanics to the player. If you already knew how it worked, you wouldn't know if you could figure out the mechanics from this clip. I need initial reactions to see if I could change it to be a more suitable animation. With that out of the way, my name is Cameron, this is Minecraft Ideas Academy, and let's get on with the video. You may recognise the idea I'm about to mention from another one of my videos, Should Minecraft Be a Survival Game? But I originally came up with the initial idea over 3 years ago. Many previous ideas or mods for food system overhauls try to encourage diversity of diet by giving potion effects or similar buffs to different food, or punishing eating too much of one food. My idea aims to encourage diversity of diet in a helpful yet unintrusive way by making some foods more suitable for different scenarios. Essentially, each food in the game would be in a group, and each group would decrease the amount of saturation and hunger lost from a certain activity. If you are planning an activity that requires a lot of sprinting, for example, you'd use up less food if you ate vegetables instead of meat. This mechanic, paired with a rebalancing of eat times and saturation and hunger values, would encourage strategy of diet, consumption of more complex foods, since they would provide the buff for more than one activity, and less eating interruptions, without disadvantaging players who wish to stick with one food. Quick heads up, this section is a little more technical than the rest. If you're not interested in the programming side, feel free to skip to this timestamp. Anyway, I decided the buff to be based on the last food eaten, so you can easily switch between foods if your dominant activity changes. I made it an add-on to the diet mod, which provides food groups for vanilla and many popular mods. The owner of the mod was kind enough to add an API method to easily get the groups a food belongs to, as well as the ability for me to disable their mod's default buffs. I also included a config option to allow people to switch to diet's native functionality, where the effects are given if enough food in that group is consumed. The library mod called Blueprint, previously called Abnormal Score, has something called tracked data, which is data that can be saved per player per world, perfect for storing the last food eaten. After that, I had to make some events, which is code that fires every time something happens. My first one fires when food is eaten, and updates the tracked data storing the last food eaten. My other events fire whenever the player gains exhaustion. In vanilla, this can be gotten from swimming, sprinting, jumping, mining, fighting, healing, and the hunger effect. Exhaustion, by the way, is what decreases saturation and hunger. The events weren't perfectly suited to my needs, however. For example, the event that fires on player heal would include healing from potion effects. In this case, I decided it wasn't a big problem. There was also no event for when a player moves, so I instead used an event that fired every game tick, and checked if the player was moving before adding exhaustion. Whenever a player gains exhaustion, and has eaten the right food beforehand, the exhaustion is reduced by 75%, meaning that food would take 4 times as long to be used up. This was originally 50%, i.e. 2 times as long, but in playtesting I didn't notice much of a difference. This value is also configurable. To make the different exhaustion sources easier to track, I employed the use of an enum, which is a list of words where each corresponds to a number. That way I don't need to remember what all the numbers mean. Implementing all this has strengthened my modding knowledge. I've used events before for my momentum enchantment, but those are relatively easy. Once you're confident with making blocks and items, I would say that events are the next thing to try. If you want to modify vanilla code in Forge, that is your first go-to. Part of coding is knowing the language and the structure, but another part is knowing how to translate your ideas to code. This sort of stuff may sound daunting at first, but it's very important and gets easier as you progress. The next step didn't involve much code. It was to balance the foods within each food group. I did this by making a table containing all of Minecraft's foods, and listed relevant stats like hunger, saturation, stack size, food group, extra effects, and how easy they are to farm. I could analyze these and find out which foods are the least worthwhile, then give them a niche. For those of you who aren't familiar with saturation, it's essentially a hidden value that determines how much exhaustion you need to gain before starting to get hungry. However, your saturation level cannot exceed your hunger level, meaning it is best to eat high saturation foods when you are almost full and low saturation foods when you are hungrier. The most obvious problem I found from my analysis was with the soups and stews. Despite healing a lot of hunger and saturation, they are not stackable at all. Buffing their stack size to 16 fixed the issue. Now the total hunger and saturation in a full stack is a lot closer to other foods, and now they have the niche of being extremely filling vegetarian dishes, making them ideal for a player sprinting around a lot. I also changed cakes to stack to 64 like they do on Bedrock Edition, because I figured making cakes easier to carry was worth the smudged icing. Another problem was that there was just too much meat. Steak or pork chops are the best for raw hunger, and cooked chicken is best for an automatic source of food because chicken breeding is automatable through eggs. There was no reason to use any others once you have those. To solve this, I made cooked mutton, rabbit, cod, and salmon quicker to eat, just like dried kelp. I also nerfed their saturation to balance this. These quick-eating meats would be ideal to eat in tight situations, like between hits, but would need to be eaten more often. I also changed melon slices, sweet berries, beetroot, and beetroot soup to be quick-eating, to give them a similar niche in their respective categories. So, now all the foods have niches, but will people care about these niches? Or will they just stick with their steak and golden carrots? Maybe Minecraft's best food is just too good to consider anything else. But I went into this project thinking that I didn't want to objectively nerf any item. I didn't want people to be forced to interact with this new system, so I will only know the answers to these questions from playtesting. If you'd be interested in helping out there, stick around till the end of the video. Initially, I wanted to balance foods from some mobs the same way I balance vanillas, but all the Abnormals mods plus Farmer's Delight add almost 200 foods. I'd also need to update this balancing whenever they added any more foods, so this wasn't feasible. I opted instead to implement a data pack system, so that players can change the food stats themselves. If you find yourself using a food too much, you can nerf it, and vice versa. This data pack system required me to learn to parse and auto-generate JSONs, which I managed to do after a lot of thought and a lot of help from my good friend Gigi. I also added a config to change which food groups are tied to which exhaustion sources, in case people want to make it work within an alternative food group layout. I used a technique called reflection to modify Vanilla's food values, but these do not reset unless the game is closed. I had to record the original food stats of any food being modified, so if a data pack was disabled, its changes could be easily wiped. When I asked King B-Dogs from Mojang for his thoughts on the idea, he mentioned it could quickly get confusing for new players. To mitigate this, I decided to change the hunger bar icons to reflect the food group of the last food eaten. My friend Rye was kind enough to make some textures for these new icons, and they do a good job at representing the food group without resembling any particular food in Minecraft. I made use of an event that fires whenever the game overlay is rendered, which includes the hunger bar. All I had to do was replace the default chicken bones with the correct icon. If the food belonged to multiple groups, the icons would alternate. Gigi once again helped with cleaning up the code, optimizing it, and helping me when I was stuck. Then I made it compatible with a mod called Apple Skin, which displays exhaustion and saturation visually on the hunger bar. This was a little trickier because I had to determine whether the mod was loaded and make sure they all displayed in the correct order. Apple Skin's code is in the public domain, however, so I could simply copy and modify its code to work with the new hunger icons. To clue players in on the benefits of eating the right food groups, I decided to add an indicator that shows when the exhaustion reduction is applied. I took inspiration from how loading bars are often animated to give the illusion of faster progress, with a subtle sheen across the icon borders to imply the hunger was going down more slowly. This wouldn't last long enough for instant events like mining and taking damage, so I had to make the sheen last for at least half a second longer, so players would have time to notice it. That's where your feedback from the start of the video comes in. I had previously asked people on Twitter and my YouTube community to have a similar question, as well as a friend in real life. I asked them to guess how the mechanic worked. The people who guessed closest thought the sheen would cause hunger to be drained quicker, not slower. This is likely because they associated the animation with motion and change instead of deceleration. I'm not sure exactly how I will modify this animation, but currently I'm considering reversing the direction of the sheen and enabling it during a non-exhaustion reducing activity. Some alternative suggestions were to make the hunger bar look protected or stronger in some way, such as making the outline bolder or the sheen more constant. But the more feedback I get from that initial reaction, the more I'll be able to determine a solution. If you're one of the people who gave me feedback at the start of the video, thank you very much. And that's all I've got for the first version of Mindful Eating. The food groups and exhaustion reduction encourage diversity of diet, the tweaks to vanilla allow the player to choose between fast eating foods and more filling foods, and the changes to the hunger icons illustrate the group of the last food eaten, as well as whether the player is doing an exhaustion reducing activity. But since the food system is such a big part of Minecraft, I'll need a lot of feedback from a lot of different player types. So, if you want to try out the mod, there's a link to its CurseForge page in the description and in the iCard in the top right hand corner of the screen. Currently it is only for Forge 1.16, but I plan to update it to Forge 1.17 soon. So, what do you think of the system? Feel free to comment below, or in the comments of its CurseForge page. Do you have any ideas for how it could be improved? Please let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, and if you really like what I do, please consider supporting me via YouTube membership. This is the new way to get a shout out in my videos, and it's very cheap. One tier even lets you hide secrets in my videos. I'm also a member of the Abnormals modding team, and people who pledge on the Patreon or Nitro Boost the Abnormals Discord server get access to beta builds of all of our mods, including unreleased ones. We also have a slew of existing vanilla style mods which you can browse through on our website. Since 1.18 is in pre-releases, I'll be working on a review video for that, so if that interests you, subscribe and hit the bell, and soon it should be up for you to enjoy. Links to other social media are in the description down below. Thank you all for watching.